This is GFree Radio. Here's your host, Peter Stewart.
Podcasting since June 2013. Hello, I'm Peter Stewart, your personal guide for living G-free, either by your choice or Mother Nature's. This is episode 30 of G-free Radio. And our interview is with the new Gluten Free Chef of the Year 2013, Thomas Fallows. Will talk us through his award-winning menu. I've seen it. It's making my mouth water. And made my thumbs look through the dictionary to look up what it all meant. We also talked to Linda Forster in the second part of our conversation with her about living G-free in the United Arab Emirates. Now, a big story this week is the emerging buckwheat allergy. If you've been eating gluten-free and still felt unwell, this could be the cause of your problems. We'll tell you about the news published in the British Medical Journal and bring you the list of other allergens which you might be sensitive to, which could point to a problem for you with buckwheat. Important stuff. We've got news of a multi-million-dollar financing for a new research project into celiac disease that could find a possible treatment over and above the usual dietary one. A report that suggests a link between GM foods and gluten-related disorders. And what's this? Gluten-free vodka? Well, it once had gluten in it, but surely that's just been distilled out. Or is it? Some say it has been, but the bottle should still be labelled accordingly. And in our mini-series on alternative grains, we look at potato flour and potato starch. So that report into buckwheat allergies comes a little bit later on in this episode of the G-free Radio Show. Really interesting. Nothing I'd heard of before. Buckwheat doesn't have gluten in, but it may be something else that you could be allergic to, especially if you've been eating gluten-free and still felt unwell. Got a couple of really interesting case studies to bring you a little bit later on. Well, first of all, we'll start off with this report about a pharmaceutical company which has raised $10 million in a series of financing. Really interesting stuff, this, because, again, for I think the second or third week in a row, certainly in recent episodes, we're talking about some more money which is being invested into finding a cure for the disease which most of us listening have got. I say most of us because, of course, some people choose to go gluten-free for their own reasons, not because they've been medically advised to do that by a health professional. And that's absolutely fine. We're a broad church here at G-free Radio. So it's we're talking about Dietary Pharmaceuticals. They're based in San Diego, California. And they've raised, as I say, $10 million. It's to develop treatments for multiple disease indication with an initial focus on celiac disease itself. So that can only be good news, I would have thought. Let's dig down a little bit more about this. I say only a little bit because there's not an awful lot of information around. We've been doing our research, but I haven't been able to find an awful lot about what Dietary aim to be doing with their $10 million. We know that the company has been formed and funded by Avalon Ventures and GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. They intend to use the funds for research and development support and development of new treatments for celiac disease. They're targeting the TG2 pathway for the development of treatments for multiple disease indications. Now, TG2 is an enzyme that's thought to play a multifactorial role in celiac disease. It's the primary human protein that's attacked as part of an autoimmune response in patients with celiac disease. It's also responsible for catalyzing a reaction with dietary gluten peptides that drives pathogenesis of the disease. And the company's developing targeted inhibitors of TG2 with the potential to suppress the autoimmune response that results in intestinal inflammation and cell pathogenesis in people like most of us. Interesting stuff. Watch this space, I guess, for another couple of years before anything further really comes out of that. They're still at the research and development stage, as I say. Linking in with that, a possible link between genetically modified foods and gluten-related disorders. And in a report which has been published in various places, I'm actually taking this one from sacbe.com, SACBEE.com, a team of experts suggesting that GM foods may be an important environmental trigger for gluten sensitivity. Citing US Department of Agriculture data, environmental protection records, medical journal reviews and international research, the authors relate genetically modified foods to 5 conditions that may either trigger or exacerbate gluten-related disorders, including, of course, celiac disease. They're
1.
Intestinal permeability,
2.
imbalanced gut bacteria,
3.
immune activation and allergic response,
4.
impaired digestion,
5.
and damage to the intestinal wall. Although wheat's been hybridised over the years, it's not a genetically modified organism that can only be created by a lab process that actually inserts genetic material into plant DNA. Wheat itself has just been changed by putting various different strains together. Now, there are 9 GM food crops currently being grown for commercial use. They are soy, corn, cotton for oil, canola for oil, sugar from sugar beets, zucchini, yellow squash, Hawaiian papaya and alfalfa. Now, the executive director of the Institute for Responsible Technology, GFree Smith, is quoted as saying the Bt toxin in corn is designed to puncture holes in insect cells. But studies show it does the same in human cells. Bt toxin may be linked to leaky gut, which physicians consistently see in gluten-sensitive patients. And Stephanie Seneff, she's the senior research scientist at MIT, expresses concern about one of the treatments. It's a weed killer called glyphosate, or Roundup. That's its registered term. Glyphosate is a patented antibiotic that destroys beneficial gut bacteria. An imbalance of gut flora commonly accompanies celiac disease and other gluten-related disorders. It's really interesting, isn't it? The week after week, we're kind of joining the dots together on this, and hopefully we're all building a bit of a clearer picture in what is adding to and exacerbating the situation in which most of us with celiac disease find ourselves. It's GFree Radio, and I'm Peter Stewart. A little bit later on, we'll be talking about another alternative grain. Grain? Well, alternative flour this week. We're going to be talking about potato flour and potato starch.
This is GFree Radio.
And now for the first of our 2 interviews this week, and we continue with the second part of our chat with Linda Forster from Gluten Free UAE. Linda set up the celiac group in the United Arab Emirates after her daughter was born with the condition.
I set up something that I quickly named Gluten Free UAE, which started with a little Facebook page, and then came Twitter and Pinterest board and a website eventually as well. And support meetings and, you know, all the kind of stuff that Celiac UK may do, but run by me only. Yeah, I mean, I remember hitting 40 people and jumping up and down in my living room going, yay, we've got 40 people. And now we have 4,500. So there are definitely people out here. And it's the 2.5 years since we started, it's made a huge difference. People are really seeing the difference here in the UAE in terms of availability of food and knowledge in restaurants. And, you know, a few more people now might know what gluten is, whereas they didn't before.
And from a grassroots level, so in the supermarkets, does GF Food have an aisle or a shelf to itself? Is it signed? Is it labelled?
Well, it depends if I've been in the neighbourhood. My local supermarket now has a gluten-free section, and it's 3 whole shelves, which is a lot by UAE standards. And the manager knows me very well and will actually come up to me now and ask me questions. But you'll find in most supermarkets it's not really in its own section. And if there is a section, it's kind of the health food section, if you like, which will have gluten foods mixed into it as well. But they are getting better. More and more stores are starting to try to have a gluten-free section. But obviously it's a melting pot of cultures here, and the staff that work in the supermarkets, they don't often speak English, or they might not be able to read the label on the food that they're stacking. So it is going to be tricky, and it is going to take longer than somewhere than maybe the UK or Sweden, where I'm from. But it is getting better. It has gotten better. There are more products available now. You can now buy gluten-free bread in the supermarket, which when my daughter was diagnosed, you could not. So, yeah, it's getting there.
And I know that quite a few UK companies export to that part of the world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most of the gluten-free foods here are imported. I mean, like everything here, there's not that much that grows naturally. I don't think actually that there is a local manufacturer of anything gluten-free. In Saudi, there certainly is a couple, but most of the food you see on the shelf here will be from America, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So, yeah, it's great. We have our Mrs. Crimbles and coconut macaroons and bread mix and then all the Australian things. So, the availability is not great, and very often once something runs out, you might not see the same product again for a couple of months. So we all hoard, but, that's just part of life here, I suppose.
And what about eating out? I mean, there must be obviously there is a language barrier there. Those little cards, those little translation cards only go so far, don't they? But nothing beats the reassurance, I suppose, of speaking to someone in their same language. So how do you cope when you do eat out?
Well, I tend to, for us personally, we tend to stick to the big chains, and very often there will be the American chains and places like Carluccio's or P.F. Chang's, where you know that they have the training manuals and they have a gluten-free menu in a different country, and they teach their staff how to deal with gluten-free diners. It's probably not as safe as it would be elsewhere, but sure, it's safer than maybe your sort of corner restaurant. And again, it depends on your sensitivity levels as well. For my daughter, she's hypersensitive celiac. She reacts to very, very little, so I take very few risks with her. But many people here, many celiacs dine out frequently and do okay. Then obviously there are incidents, but nowhere is incident-free. It's never going to be completely risk-free. But you've got pizza chains and things now doing their best to create safe pizzas for celiacs. And yeah, it's great. Naked Pizza do a great gluten-free pizza in its own gluten-free section with no contamination. So yeah, there's a lot more available now than a while back, but still a long way to go.
So it really sounds though you've been so instrumental in bringing people together and shouting with one voice. How influential do you think you have been over this past 4 years?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, people tell me I've made a huge difference and that so much has happened. I don't really see it as me doing it alone. I think, numbers speak for themselves. And if you're able to go and say, hi, my name is Linda and I'm doing this work for a group called Gluten Free UAE and we have this many people. I mean, I couldn't do that without the people. So the fact that I have all these people behind me, I mean, it's their work as well. Whether they're there in the meetings with me or not, it doesn't really matter to me. They're there in numbers and backing me up. So the numbers have a huge impact on supermarket managers and restaurant owners. Of course they're going to listen when you have that number of people behind you. So yeah, I've made a difference. I've made a huge difference, but like I said, it wouldn't have been possible unless I had people backing me up. So yeah, I'm not so good at digging myself up, if you like. So to me, it was a natural thing to do. I'm not the kind of person who sits down and does nothing. I wanted for my child to be normal and to grow up feeling normal. And if the only way for that to happen was to do what I've done, then so be it. And, it worked. So great. But the work is never done. But that's why places like the UK have Celiac UK with full-time employees that are paid to spread awareness about celiac disease. That doesn't exist here, but there is one full-time employee. I do it for free, but someone needs to do it, so I will continue.
But you can't continue. You're leaving.
I'm not going to stop shouting about gluten, though. I'll continue that no matter where I go. So that's like my life calling now.
So why are you leaving? Is it a job change or itchy feet?
Well, I think my daughter, like I said before, she's had a lot of issues with her health, and part of these issues, I mean, she was born prematurely, which means her lungs were not fully developed. And on top of that, she had RSV, which is a respiratory illness, which causes pneumonia, and she had that as a baby. And then after that, she's had several pneumonias. So unfortunately, that together with the dust here and a celiac patient being more susceptible to pneumonia, it's not a good mix. And she has struggled for the last year and a half now with very low oxygen levels frequently, and it's hard for her to breathe, especially when it's dusty, which is pretty much every day. So we have made the decision to take her out for a couple of years to let her body heal and recover, and hopefully she can get stronger and her lungs can get stronger, because there's just this constant irritant when she breathes here. So my husband is staying, and I will be going backwards and forwards. So I'm not cutting all ties. And Gluten Free UAE, the work will continue. I will step more to the background, but I will have a team of people doing things for me. So that will not end. Too much work has gone into it to just sort of put it on ice, I suppose.
Linda Forster there from Gluten Free UAE, and as Linda was saying, she's now left the United Arab Emirates and has resettled in Europe. Our every success, every best wish to Linda in her new home, and also to the group that she founded, that she's now stepped away from. And still to come in episode 30 of the GFree radio show for this week, we're going to be looking at that buckwheat allergy story. Is it a potential problem in 21st century Britain? The report has been published in the British Medical Journal, so it's a very serious, very considered report with several case studies. We'll bring you two of those case studies just to show you the extent of how buckwheat can react with some patients. They're both Britons indeed, and only a couple of cases of buckwheat allergy has been seen in the UK, or at least it's been evidenced and reported and recorded in the United Kingdom. There is a thought, as you will hear a little bit later on, that buckwheat allergy is much more prevalent, but doctors simply don't know what to look out for, and indeed no one really knows how to test for it unless there are very obvious and very severe symptoms. Again, you may want to be listening to that and referring it to your own condition and seeing whether anything rings a bell with you. That report coming up in a few moments' time. First of all, what about labelling vodka as gluten-free? Should it be? Or is that just another marketing gimmick? Well, this report from consumerist.com, and it says gluten is all the rage. Not for us, it's not, but I think I know where they're coming from. Certainly avoiding it has become more and more popular. Certainly for those of us with celiac disease, avoiding it is very popular indeed. And the report says making gluten-free products a potential money-maker for companies who've seized on the marketing power of such products is all the rage. But when it comes to smacking a gluten-free label on vodka and other distilled spirits, is it all just another way to get a bit more cash out of consumers? They're quoting a gluten-free vodka, and they say there's no need for gluten-free labels on distilled spirits, at least so say some critics. It's because during the distillation process, heating up the alcohol removes gluten from the rest of the mixture used to make it. Certainly that's always been my kind of understanding. But what if you're super sensitive? Could just the very, very smallest part per million still be reacting with you and causing a bit of a problem? Distillation involves heating, which vaporises the alcohol as a way to remove it from the mixture. Distilled spirits, because of the distillation process, should contain no detectable gluten residues or gluten peptide residues. That's according to Steve Taylor. He's the co-director of the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Food Allergy Research and Resource Program, and he's been quoted in Scientific America. Proteins and peptides are not volatile, and thus would not distill over. So basically, none of the gluten-y ingredients will come out with the alcohol, so they shouldn't show up in the amounts that would bother people with gluten sensitivities or celiac disease. The rules governing gluten-free labels say anything bearing that distinction must contain less than 20 parts per million using precise scientific methods. That testing might not be necessary, says Steve Taylor. He says gluten-free vodka, or at least the label on it, is a silly thing. All vodka is gluten-free, unless there's some flavoured vodka out there where someone adds a gluten-containing ingredient. He says, I know that many celiac sufferers are extra cautious. That's their privilege. But their vodka concerns are usually not science-based. Well, while there aren't any studies that prove distilled spirits will bother people with gluten intolerances, many still report symptoms after drinking distilled grain-based products. According to the executive director of the Celiac Sprue Association in the United States, she says that because the gluten is in the product before it ferments, there's no way it all stays behind during distillation. So I guess at the end of the day, it just depends on you, whether you've ever suffered adverse effects from drinking distilled spirits. And if you have, obviously, I would suggest stay away altogether. Or maybe distilled spirits are good to go for you, label or no label. And with the Christmas season just around the corner, it may not just be overindulgence on the Christmas pudding that's causing you a bit of an upset. It may be perhaps the brandy butter that goes with it.
Write your message, or better still, record your message. This is radio, guys. Send all your celiac stuff to us at gfreeradio@hotmail.com.
And our heartfelt congratulations this week to a gentleman by the name of Thomas Fallows, because he has been crowned Gluten Free Chef of the Year 2013 by Coeliac UK. It's a competition run for professional chefs by the National Charity for Celiac Disease Sufferers, and in association with the Institute of Hospitality and the Craft Guild of Chefs. And Thomas Fallows is the assistant chef at Hindalini's Gourmet Cafe in Ribblesdale Park. And it occurred to me, where or what is Ribblesdale Park? So I looked it up, and it's in the heart of the Ribble Valley. Rolling 1,000-acre private estate in an area of outstanding national beauty on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales. There's the best place to mountain bike in the north there, White Scar Cave, the longest show cave in Britain, the Tolkien Trail. Tolkien? Yeah, a walk which inspired the Lord of the Rings, apparently, and the Bowland Wild Boar Park, brackets, a great family day out, all within easy reach, as obviously is Hindalini's Gourmet Cafe as well. And Thomas Fallows works there, and I caught up with him the other day.
It was to prepare a three-course menu for 2 covers, incorporating at least 2 gluten-free elements, so that's sort of, I did batter and pastry. The starter was smoked cod fritters in an autumnal salad, so it was with fennel and red onion and rocket, and that was with a balsamic syrup. And then for the main, I did rabbit, which was stuffed with porcini mushrooms, shallots and sage, wrapped in pancetta, and that was with polenta and parmesan triangles, with kale and parsnip crisps and red wine jus. And for the dessert, it was pumpkin and squash sweet pastry tart with hazelnut grappa syrup that I made myself, and beige meringue.
That sounds fantastic. So, how did you hear about the competition in the first place?
Well, I'm studying at Accrington and Rosendale College. It was them who told me about the competition, because it was for over 23s as well. So I'm sort of a mature student, and 24, so they decided it'd be a good challenge for me. The starter is adjusted, the batter I had to adapt, obviously, so that was using some gluten-free self-raising flour, some corn flour, and also a bit of potato starch, just to give the batter a nice colour. And same with the pastry tart as well. That one took quite a bit of experimenting, actually, to sort of get it right, and it was quite challenging, actually. The main was polenta, which is naturally sort of gluten-free, but sort of done in a way sort of to replicate sort of little sandwiches.
How much does celiac awareness or gluten-free food play a part in your course?
It is a part of it. I'm learning about lots of different dietary requirements, whether that's if someone's vegetarian or lactose intolerant or gluten-free. So yeah, it's something we do learn about, and how we can provide meals for everybody.
Is this something do you think that you're going to continue with, specialising in free-from menus?
It's certainly something I think about. I'm quite early on in sort of my career, so it's still figuring out what direction I'm going to go in, but it's something I'd like to do more of.
What's the general understanding of gluten-free foods, do you think, in the catering profession?
I think there's definitely a need for sort of increased education, really, about gluten-free foods. I think in the trade sometimes there's sort of a negative attitude of simply taking things away from the plate rather than being creative and adapting the menus to incorporate gluten-free elements.
So your biggest challenge seems to have been that pastry then?
Oh yes, definitely. Sort of experimenting with different ingredients, different flours, different quantities, different fats. It's quite tricky to get it right. You have to balance a lot of things, and you change one thing and it can just throw everything else out. So it's a really good challenge, actually, and really got me thinking about how food actually works and how the ingredients work together.
It's a bit awkward cooking without gluten, isn't it?
There's a lot of options in terms of gluten-free flours now. Cornmeal, gram flour, rice flour, potato flour, all of these different things. So it's just a case of really just experimenting and finding out what works, I think.
And what do you win, Tom?
The prize is, quite incredible, actually. It's a week-long stage, which is like a work experience at Gleneagles in the 2 Michelin-star restaurant working under Andrew Farley.
So that sounds pretty special. You're going to be obviously lapping that up, and I bet some of your other course colleagues are pretty jealous now, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they are a little bit. A lot of people are volunteering to come with me and help me take my badges up there, actually.
And tell us about where you're working at the moment. Is there a particular gluten-free menu, or are you able to adapt food for celiacs at Hinderlini's?
Well, we can, but I'm not sort of in charge there. The head chef sort of decides the menu there, so I don't really have a whole lot of influence there. But it certainly I think I might speak to the owner and see what he thinks about maybe trying to incorporate more of a gluten-free side to the menu.
Excellent. OK, well, thank you for joining us. One final thing, I guess you want to thank the people who kind of put it all together, don't you? I mean, that was Coeliac UK, for obvious reasons. They wanted to run it to raise awareness of the availability of more gluten-free food on menus generally, but also the Institute of Hospitality and the Craft Guild of Chefs as well. It's quite important, isn't it, that these people kind of get together to extend the range for all sorts of people with different dietary requirements.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it has to be sort of more of a collective effort if you're really going to affect the whole world of catering and hospitality. So you have the sort of suppliers and the restaurants and the general catering trade, and changing all of that takes quite a large effort, I think, to change people's thinking about it. I think at the moment it's people are starting to realise the significance of it and how many people are actually affected by the disease. And I think because of that, certainly it's definitely going in the right direction and going forward into developing better menus for people who suffer from celiac disease.
And our congratulations again to Thomas Fallows, who's the assistant chef at Hinderlini's Gourmet Cafe in Ribblesdale Park. And also our thanks to Coeliac UK and the Institute of Hospitality and the Craft Guild of Chefs, who put all that event together. Thanks very much indeed for doing that, because essentially what it's all about is to raise awareness, highlight the need for more gluten-free menu options when we go out to eat. I should say that runners-up, Carol Salisbury, chef manager at One Call Direct from Renfrew in Renfrewshire, Christopher Bridge, head chef at Ravenstone Manor and Charlotte's View Restaurant in Keswick in Cumbria. In the up-and-coming Gluten Free Chef of the Year competition, as for students aged 23 and under, Jonathan Farmer from Norwich in Norfolk, who's studying VRQ Level 2 Professional Cookery at City College Norwich, was announced as the winner. Runner-up was Catherine Holmes from East Hunsbury in Northampton. And the menu that Jonathan put together was, listen to this, charred watermelon, cucumber textures, watermelon granita and pine nuts, followed by duck leg ravioli, butternut squash puree and spiced duck broth, and dessert, chocolate torte, raspberry sorbet, chocolate crumb, pear and chilli. Hungry yet? And now let's bring you that story about a potential allergy to do with buckwheat. It's really intriguing, this. I've not heard about it before. Quite a bit of information to bring you here. Buckwheat becoming increasingly available in the United Kingdom. Buckwheat allergy is well known in other places, Asia, for example, because they've been cooking with buckwheat for much longer than we have. It's very traditional in Japanese, Korean, East European cooking, for example, Japanese noodles, Korean jelly, also groat porridge as well, which is commonly eaten in Asia and Eastern Europe, Italian pasta, pizza cherry, polenta taragna, combined with maize, and also various pancake blinis in Russia. Also very important in this story, galette in Brittany as well, and also a kind of pancake in the Netherlands as well. And also, as well as eating buckwheat, and this is also important to what I'm about to say as well, also buckwheat pillows and other bedding, things like buckwheat soothers that you can heat up in a microwave and that kind of thing to keep you warm in bed at night. They have buckwheat inside them. Bear that in mind as I tell you that no adult cases of buckwheat allergy in the UK have been reported until very, very recently. A couple of cases I'm about to tell you, and sensitisation was confirmed in both cases by positive skin prick testing and specific IgE to buckwheat. And essentially what this report is saying, the report incidentally published in the British Medical Journal, is that because of the growing popularity of foods that contain buckwheat being eaten in the United Kingdom, a buckwheat allergy is likely to become increasingly common. So, first of all, let's remind ourselves, what is buckwheat? Nothing to do with wheat, so therefore it's really handy for people with celiac disease or intolerant of wheat flour. And increasingly it is used in free-from foods, certainly bread and other bakery goods, if you like, pasta and pizza, even soup and beer. There's quite well-recognised buckwheat allergy, as I say, in Asia, particularly Japan. Japan seems to be the country where buckwheat is most commonly eaten, but fewer reports elsewhere. Now, when I say UK, you can also say northern Western Europe and also North America as well. What are the symptoms? Well, asthma, rhinitis, gastrointestinal disturbance, angioedema and anaphylaxis can occur. Fatalities have also been described, and this is either from ingestion or inhalation. And it is very, very likely, because so few cases have been brought to the attention of medical professionals, that a lot of buckwheat allergy is being missed in the UK at the moment. So let's bring you those two case studies. Number one, they're quite short, but they kind of put it into a bit more context. It's always useful, isn't it, if you can see a real illustration of something which has happened to somebody. A 57-year-old property developer, in this case, who frequently travels to France, was referred for assessment for an anaphylactic reaction. His initial adverse reaction occurred a couple of minutes after eating a galette in France. He developed generalised pruritus, that's an itching, no rash, and vomiting, which resolved without needing medical attention. But 12 months later, he reacted again after eating homemade bread made using buckwheat flour, bought over from France. After 10 minutes, he developed generalised pruritus, diarrhoea, vomiting and angioedema. He was attended by paramedics who documented hypertension and administered standard treatment for anaphylaxis before monitoring him in hospital for a few hours. Quite serious stuff. And case study 2 now, a 63-year-old woman referred for assessment of an allergic reaction to a new brand of so-called healthy muesli. And this is a brand which is available in the UK. It contains oats, raisins, sultanas, currants, sunflower seeds and buckwheat. Within 10 minutes of eating, she developed cough, bronchospasm and widespread urticaria, which is a severe itching where the skin actually reddens but also creates a bump on your skin as well. She went to accident and emergency. She was treated and discharged following brief observation. Since then, she'd eaten most of the ingredients of the muesli again, except for buckwheat, and she's been okay. But interestingly, when they dug down and spoke to her after this incident, she reported a dry cough and itchy palms when she worked in a supermarket 7 years previously when she was putting exotic flour, different flours, onto shelves, including buckwheat flour. Sensitization via inhalational exposure followed by later anaphylaxis on oral intake has been described. So, in the context of the direction of those findings, they were taken as confirmatory of a buckwheat allergy. This report in the British Medical Journal, and I'm coming to the end of this now, the two cases are typical of reported buckwheat allergy from other countries, and the BMJ report says that first case illustrates how buckwheat exposure may arise with ethnic dietary influences, and the second case highlights the increased use of buckwheat in health foods or gourmet foods. While this is the first report of adult buckwheat allergy in the UK, these modes of exposure are likely to increase, making this problem more pertinent in the future. And this report continues getting increasingly interesting because what they're talking about is a possible cross-sensitivity between buckwheat and other plant allergens. And obviously I'm no medical expert, but it seems to me that if you have some kind of reaction to the following: rice, poppy seed, latex, which is increasingly common, cashew nuts, walnuts and sesame seeds or sesame nuts, then you might have a reaction to buckwheat as well. Those findings suggest a wider spectrum of patients at risk of buckwheat allergy. And, of course, a growing problem is that because it is not a recognised allergen, it doesn't have to be listed as an allergen. It doesn't have to be emboldened on the new packaging that we've got coming our way in the United Kingdom. It doesn't have to be regulated in any way either. Buckwheat is an undeclared allergen in wheat burgers, pizza dough, pasta, multi-cereal, bread and pepper as well. I'm guessing from that they mean the shaken pepper to bulk it out. Hidden exposures could convey significant risk. Well, as we said a little earlier on, some of these people have died, not the two case studies we referred to, but there have been cases of people dying in the past. And in conclusion, buckwheat allergy merits awareness in the UK since exposures are likely to increase via a more ethnically diverse diet, plus increasing use of buckwheat in popular food sectors. Failure to recognise buckwheat allergy could expose individuals to considerable risk. Better awareness of this potential allergy is called for in the United Kingdom, and as I say, northwestern Europe and North America as well, that they also reference in this report in the British Medical Journal. Intriguing, really interesting stuff, and I hope you're listening to that feeling sorry for other people and not necessarily thinking to yourself, well, hold on, that's ringing a few alarm bells with me as well. If it is, I'm glad that we have been able to bring that to your attention. Please rest assured, we're passing on the information so you can go to your health professional, to your GP, to your dietitian, to your allergy consultant and pass that information on to them. It's only recently been reported in the BMJ, although it is common elsewhere around the world, as I say, and just asking for more professional help. I don't want to worry you unnecessarily, but that report brought to you by GFree Radio, so you're more aware of a situation which may affect your personal health.
Follow us on Twitter. We're at GFree Radio.
And we'll move on, finally, in this week's episode to talking about some other alternative grains or alternative flours to cook with after that rather disturbing report. A very brief one from deglutinous.com, which is based in in Australia, I believe, and they're big supporters of GFree Radio, so hello to them. And potato starch, flour and potato starch are all the same, but potato flour is different. Never substitute potato flour for potato starch in baking recipes because it's much heavier and stronger in the flavour, it says. Potato starch is very fine, very little flavour. It's made from raw white potatoes. The peel is removed. The flesh is then made into mushy pulp and dehydrated to form potato starch. That process involves no cooking, so potato starch doesn't absorb very well until heated, but it is good for flouring before frying because it browns well, cakes and biscuits if blended with other flours because it adds moisture to them, thickening sauces, soups, stews and gravies because it tolerates a higher temperature than cornstarch. But like with all starches, it's very light. Mix it slowly or face a fine sheen of potato starch all over the kitchen. It's a bit like when you have to cook icing sugar or beat icing sugar into butter or something when doing the baking, isn't it? You end up with icing sugar all over your kitchen surfaces. So that's potato starch. Potato flour is heavier. It's got a much more obvious potato taste. It's made using whole potatoes, including the peel. They're cooked and dehydrated. It'll absorb large amounts of liquid, so it's very rarely used as a main ingredient in baking, but it is good at holding various ingredients together. So therefore it's good for batter or coating meats and fish before deep frying and adding texture and flavour to flour blends. As I say, much more information at deglutinous.com. This is Peter Stewart. That's been the GFree Radio Show, episode 30. Thank you for the loan of your ears. We're back with much more next week in episode 31, including next week on the show. We start our run-up to the festive season proper, because next week's episode 31 is on the 7th of December, so we've got much of a festive feel as we go gluten-free baking. Not just with a cookbook that you can download, but also a gluten-free baking magazine that you can download on your Kindle or your Nook or your iPad or e-reader, whatever you get for Christmas. So we'll bring you some information about those next week, and also lined up over the next few weeks. We've got some gluten-free beers we're going to be talking about, and also various sweet treats, various cakes and candies and biscuits and chocolates as well. And then over the Christmas New Year period, we're not going away. We are the world's only gluten-free podcast, so we're going to continue that here every week, and we've got a couple of special programs lined up for December and into the new year as well, into January. But that's it from the GFree Radio Show for this week. I'll just leave you with this thought on Twitter from Christopher Young. On Twitter he's at YoungTOFA92, and he says, "I didn't choose the gluten-free life. The gluten-free life chose me."
And that was the GFree Radio Show with Peter Stewart. And you. Thanks for listening. And remember, until next time, be good, be healthy, and be GFree.